I'm Lisa, and I'm here with Carol Banens. We want to welcome you to our second of four live stream series. We're talking about barriers to healing. And Carol Banens is a grief educator and coach. Carol has been in her former life a physical therapist. And after losing her husband, Brian, about 6.5 years ago, Carol decided to turn her attention in her work towards supporting others, widows and widowers, and others who are looking to integrate their grief just as we are. Carol is also the author of three books now available on Amazon. The first one is a beautiful book of poetry that she's put together called Kintsugi Your Heart. And she has two other books that are really focusing on allowing us to learn how to give ourselves the support and care that we need as we're grieving and as we're healing. So, welcome and thank you for being here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lisa McFarland, and as Carol has done, I too have turned my focus and my work to supporting others who are in the grieving/healing process right along with us. I have a background of a corporate career that I walked away from several years ago to turn my attention toward this process of healing. And I too have a book on Amazon called The Healing Path. It's the first in a series of three books that's really looking at some of these challenges that we go through as we're grieving and learning to heal, because healing really is the end game. So Carol and I both are in this space, but we have in our chats and in our communications just really discovered and identified the challenges that we face in this space of trying to support others, and just this big overall hurdle of encouraging, inviting, um, and helping to create a safe space for healing to occur. What we find is that now that we've become a little bit more comfortable chatting about healing and grieving, and certainly writing about it and trying to walk the walk and not just talk it, is that a lot of folks just they can't get over that hurdle of asking for help, of knowing where to engage and where to get support. So we're hoping that this series of conversations, intentionally brief conversations, sort of paves the way and helps others become more comfortable with the conversations. So I welcome you, Carol. Would you like to just say good morning here before we jump in?
I would. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. So nice to be here. And gosh, there are so many barriers, aren't there, Lisa, that we could go on all day for it, I think.
Yeah, there are a lot of barriers. And so we're going to focus today and welcome others who I see people are starting to come in through the waiting room. Thank you for being here and welcome. We're going to be talking today about situational external barriers. We talked last session about some emotional things that can kind of get in the way. And what we want to do is start off, we're tackling one or two barriers per call, and keeping it intentionally brief so as not to overwhelm us. But we're talking today about just the cultural and familial kind of barriers that can keep us from healing. And as we look at our own experience, the thing that comes to mind for me, Carol, is just the particularly the cultural area. You know, you're in Canada and I'm in the States, and in this part of the world, we really don't like to talk about uncomfortable things, let alone death. I'll just
Yeah,
say the D word, right?
it's so true. Actually, it's interesting that I find I'm English, obviously, and it's the same there. Nobody wants to really talk about grief. But particularly, I found in North America and Canada, people don't like saying he died, or death.
He, he passed.
And he passed away. I lost my husband. He's moved on. He's transcended. And it's interesting, isn't it? Is that just because we are so uncomfortable as a society talking about death? I think it probably is. But culturally, coming from, an English background, it really is keep calm and carry on. We never talked about it. Nobody, I think, really talks about death. So when grief comes, we don't know how to deal with it. So culturally, I think we have to look. There are so many different cultures, and we all approach it in a different way. You have sort of the Mediterraneans who are very open in their mourning, and I think it's very healthy. We don't do that here. we're told to be strong, or you're so strong, as if that's a good thing, and it's not a
That's
good thing.
something we're
It's
trying to be, right?
Yeah, we're trying to be strong and pretend that this person who died, or these people that died, they're gone now, so let's just move on. But that's not the reality of grief. And I think culturally, I think it's nice when you see, and I was looking up the different mourning periods that different
Mm.
religions have, for example. Some have 3 days, some have a year. They have all different things. Judaism has sitting in Shiva. Well, you're acknowledging the depth of what has happened, and you're allowing time. And I think this is the thing that we've come to so often, isn't it? We don't allow ourselves time to process our grief. And society expects us, culture expects us to get back to work, for example. 3 to 5 days bereavement leave. How can you possibly do that when you've lost a child, lost a husband, lost a wife? You cannot think. And so culturally, the expectation is to move on, get back to normal, and let's just kind of push it away. And that's not the reality of grief when you've loved someone. It's also not the reality of grief, let's be honest, if you've had a difficult relationship, because we still grieve those people too, whether it was a difficult parent, a difficult partner, abusive even. You grieve the person you wish they were. And it makes grief more complicated, and we don't even allow for that. Um, Culturally, there can be shame. There can be shame. So, is it
Mm.
a death by suicide? Is it a death from addiction? And then we bring in our whole religious beliefs there. Whatever your beliefs are, the old beliefs were often with Christianity that somebody takes their own life, it wasn't their place to do that.
And it's a sin, right?
It's a sin. It's a sin, and you can't be buried in the same cemetery as your family. There's a different spot. I think that's changing. But I think the shame around that means that your grief can be invalidated, because if the family's like, yeah, we're just not talking about it. We'll pretend
Right.
it doesn't
So just
happen.
reflecting back, sorry,
Yeah.
did I cut you
No,
off
no,
there, Carol?
no, no, you're good.
What I'm really hearing you say, and I think it's worth calling out, is that it's not just culturally around the big D word death. It's also it becomes more complicated by the mechanism of death and
Yeah.
the circumstances surrounding that. And I'm wondering, um, leaving suicide just off to the side of our conversation for
Mhm.
a second and just talking about the cultural and familial challenges and barriers that we're talking about. I guess the question becomes, how do we, and it's not that we can't include suicide in the conversation, but that's such an extremely complex
Yeah.
situation. But how do we, not just transcend this barrier of our upbringing and our sort of society that we're living in, but also help others along. So it's not just our own challenge, like we have to figure out what we need, regardless of the constrictions or restrictions of the
Yeah.
scenarios that we're in. And then how do we also help others along, so that they too can, open up to the idea that, hey, society says we deal with death this one way, but not only is my loved one, dealing with grief, but how do we allow them to kind of get into that process with us, or at least open to it?
Mhm. I think it's really difficult, because I think if you are in a fairly strict family or culture, often that supersedes the need of the individual, the family, and they get pushed to the side. And I think education and talking about
Hmm.
grief is the way that we can start to open people's minds to it and say, oh, maybe there is a different way. Maybe we can honor what the family wants, but also I can reach out for support elsewhere. I can
Hmm.
read a book, I can come to workshops, I can come to master classes, I can hire a therapist, a coach, a counselor to help me in my own grief need. And I think we have to say it's okay to reach out. That's
Hmm.
another thing culturally, right? Certainly in England. And I know we have somebody from the UK listening, reaching out for therapy. Well, what on earth is wrong with you? Nobody,
Right.
certainly when I grew up there, it was nothing. And of course, you come to the States and it's a much more, and Canada, it's a much more familiar thing. It's a comfortable thing. People have a therapist. And so I think it's about learning that we can get support and we can honor some of our family rules and show them, there are other ways. It's okay to honor this, and you need to look after yourself. And how do we do that? Well, we get support. We have time. We need time to process as well. We cannot rush through it, but we're forced to, even with work, right? We're forced to get back to work, very little time off. So how do we, education, I think, is the way we do it.
Excellent. And another thing that's coming to mind in my own experience is, finding ways to honor, we talk a lot about, and when we're talking about healing, we talk a lot about rituals and we talk a lot about creating ways to honor the person, because as you and I and others have talked a lot about also is just this integration, right? The idea that we're not the same person, we're not going to be the same person. And as we're learning to sort of fold, I like to bake, and I always think about like folding the ingredient, you're wrapping
Yeah.
and you're folding that. You're not forcing it, but you're kind of folding in these ideas, for example, starting a foundation or having particular days that we hold dear to us, and perhaps we create a nice meal or plan something at the cemetery or wherever we may be honoring our loved one who died, that we've laid their body to rest. These are ways that we can not only nurture our own healing, but also, I don't want to say show others, but sort of invite them to bear witness to the fact that, yeah, we're still hurting, but this pain, it's part of us now.
Hmm.
And as we continue to not force it and shove it in people's faces, but, oh, I'm, me doing a walk to raise money or a fundraiser, or maybe I'm like you have done, written a book of poetry. We're doing these things and allowing the people in our circles and in our shared culture to see that even though they may not have gone down this road or known someone else who has suffered or experienced profound loss, that they can sort of see, oh, this is a different way to do
Yeah.
it. They're not hiding. They're not sticking their head in sand. They're actually learning how to incorporate their grief and their healing and their honor for the person into the culture.
I think that's a really good point. And somebody said to me, a good friend who read my poetry book, said, I had no idea you felt like that.
Mm.
I worked with her every day. I had no idea.
That just it gives me goosebumps because that is the moment, right?
Right? You have no idea how somebody's grieving. You can't know. But if we can do these little rituals, yeah, it's an indication that guess what? We still have grief. We still need to honor our grief and our person. And I love the word invite. We're inviting you
Mm.
to see that. This is how we're dealing with it. Perhaps this is something you can do, right? And when you start talking about it, you get ideas like maybe it is just lighting a candle on their birthday. Maybe it is as simple as that. You
That's
get
a
to
great
choose,
point. That's a
right?
great point. Could also be like photographs or,
Yeah,
I social media, ways that we can honor. I've seen that very
yeah,
commonly
yeah.
as another way. Let's transition now, if we could. I want to
Mhm.
look at this other barrier, which is a really this one, and I think it's so often we find when we're talking about grief, when we're talking about healing, we're uncovering things that aren't unique to grief, but they become spotlit or gaslit
Yes,
almost. These
yes.
things that we haven't sorted through. So, this next barrier that we're looking at as an external barrier is just this idea that, busyness. If I can just busy myself, this is a very under noted or under recognized barrier to healing, which is to stay busy. Because I actually think that, I know for myself, and I guess I didn't say this in the introduction, but I've lost, sadly, I can't even smile when I say it, but two of my children very young and several years ago. And for me, not only did I jump into, my daughter died, so therefore I'll become a pediatric ICU nurse. that was a way to honor her, but it was also a way to stay busy. And I think that many people actually see busyness as a strategy.
Coping
And I
strategy.
am
Yeah,
I am here to tell you
it's
that it
not.
is not a strategy. It is
It
a
isn't.
it is a barrier to healing,
Yeah,
and that in as much as using a sort of sense of staying busy as a way to cope with
yeah,
grief or a way to protect ourselves, in as much as that is effective, it is also effective at delaying, if not preventing completely, the
yeah.
healing process. So anything that we were sort of successful in putting off to the side, as we're, trying to move through the world with our grief, we are equally as successful at um, being sure that it's going to be there when we do slow down. Grief can, I always say, outlive, outweigh, outplay, outlast our greatest coping mechanisms, and this one is no different. So, what are your thoughts about that kind of
Ah, I
overscheduling, over?
I so agree. I so agree. I've seen people do that after really traumatic losses, just dive right back into busyness. And I get it because you cannot deal with the pain all at once. And we could talk for a long time, but the dual process model, where they talk about going into your loss oriented kind of tasks of crying and looking at photos, and then going to more restorative things like maybe emptying the dishwasher, making a meal, starting to go back to work, but never staying in one or the other, oscillating between. And I think
Hmm.
busyness can be useful in short bursts of time as a distraction, as a sense of normality, but we have to then oscillate back to the grief to allow it. It's not all one or all the other. And busyness just will exhaust you and will burn you out. And we both
Yeah, and
know
it's bringing
about this
me.
because we did this. We got busy. We pushed the grief aside. And that's how I wrote a poetry book 5 years after my husband died. Not
Mm.
in the aftermath, but 5 years. Because finally I stopped working and went, oh, I haven't dealt with it. Poof, out it came.
Darn it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's still here.
Yeah.
And I think, that busyness, that's an easy word for us to use. It can come in so many forms, right? It can come in, I have seen and worked with folks who, right away will make major changes, like, selling their home or changing jobs, or, doing a lot of travel and things like that. And to your point, those things, they do have a place on the healing journey and on the healing path. Going back to that illustration or that imagery I was thinking about a moment ago in baking, is we want to layer these things in. We don't want to have them take over. And another thing that's coming to mind, just talking about this busyness, is always learning to, you and I have talked before, and we do a lot of work with meditation and stillness, and learning to um, create space for these layers. And, even a minute a day, if
Yeah.
that's all the heart can stand. But taking a minute a day, 60 seconds even, I've talked about this with folks who are really deep in grief, and just saying, listen, before you put your feet on the floor in the morning, just, if it's 30, you start where you can. If it's 30
Yep.
seconds, but just even with one cleansing breath, one in, one out, allowing your body to wake up, allowing yourself to get you get your wits a little bit before your feet hit the floor. It could be something you do in the evening. Perhaps you
Yeah.
go to bed and you keep a journal, or even a very small notepad. Journals can be so overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
One piece of paper saying, I thought of my daughter today because I saw another mother and daughter, and that triggered a memory in me. And just taking a moment to write that down, that is making space, and that is a way, of folding it. And so, this busyness stuff, especially when it's social, and I know, because you and I have done other workshops and things together, one of the things that you have talked about that I just want to call out here is this idea that, when we make social commitments, particularly when we're healing and we're still, in our grief, having this um having this out of like take a friend or have somebody go with you that volunteers, they understand going into the situation that you might need to leave an hour in or 10 minutes in. You
Yeah.
might not want to stay for 5 hours at a particular event. And you say, hey, will you be my quick exit if I need it? And that's just such a gift, that if you're supporting someone who's grieving, you can say, I'll be your plus one. And listen, when you need to go, you just say the word. And I think social commitments, especially because there's so many available, that can be a way that we create this unconscious barrier to healing when we're constantly saying yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, going back to boundary setting, if we didn't do this well before we lost someone profoundly important to us,
We're
we're
not
not
going to
going to
do it
do
well
it
now.
well. We're
No,
not.
and
So we
and
need to
and
work on these things.
we do, and you're so right about the social part, because even if you're social, and I'm pretty social, or I was, the energy levels.
Yeah.
And so, the external pressure to join in, to get back to normal, to, well, aren't you coming? It's a year. Aren't you okay now? No, actually, not quite. And again, it comes back for me always to education, because unless people can start to understand that grief comes along, we don't know what to do with it. It affects us differently, and it can last for different amounts of time. So somebody at a year may be great going out socially. Somebody else may say, I can do an hour, then I'm done. And you think, but that's not how you were before. No, because I'm not the
Nope.
same as I was before. And honestly, I didn't know this until I went through grief. You don't understand it until you've really gone through it. I think that part of it. But there are so many of these businesses, as you say, whether it's getting back to work, whether it's redecorating the house, anything rather than sit quietly for that 60 seconds. And 60 seconds can seem really long when you're not used to meditating, even when you are, to sit with an uncomfortable emotion. It's heart-wrenching. And so just maybe putting your hand on your heart and
I love that.
yeah, taking a few deep breaths and just acknowledging, I'm really sad. That's
And I
it. No
think
story. Just
really also just remembering that it doesn't mean it will always be this way,
yes.
and allowing yourself to either decline invitations or to accept invitations on a um
With an
on a
understanding.
yeah, like, hey, I'm gonna attend this event. I had this terrible, and I still do have this kind of have had some terrible experiences in the aftermath of losing my daughter and my son, where I would go to things like baby showers and things, and it never occurred to me that I just decline. Like, I
Yeah,
felt like, oh, well, they were there supporting me, they came to mine, it's not their fault. Like, I had this warped sense of having to care for others, um, on a lower threshold than my own care. So I would sort of put other people first, and that's the kind of thing that, in aggregate, when we really say yes to things that are harmful for us, then we really do this kind of invisible damage that one day catches up, and it can tear us. Then we wonder why we're at something that we think we would enjoy, and suddenly we find ourselves in the bathroom crying because we didn't handle all the other crap.
yep, yep.
We put ourselves in harm's way, not really listening to our gut. Our stomach may be turning, maybe we feel nervous about it, but we sort of like drive on and let's keep doing it, keep moving forward. And then we get surprised when we get those grief gremlins, attack us with what seems like out of nowhere, when really it's just this, what do they call it? The straw that, breaks the
I
camel's back, I
totally
guess.
resonate with that, Lisa. Not long after, well, 6 months after Brian died, and my mum's in England and not that well. And she's like, no, come home, come home. And I knew I didn't want to go home. She wasn't in our family home anymore. And I didn't want to stay in friends, so I had to stay in a hotel. I went to visit, and then we had a family meal at a restaurant. And I can remember literally going off to the washroom and crying because I wasn't ready for it. It was just too much. I felt apart. I didn't fit. It was, and I'm glad I saw my mum, but it was that feeling that I need to look after her more than I needed to look after myself. And I think so common in women, if we're talking about culture,
Yes.
we nurture others, we put others ahead of ourselves. And in grief, sometimes we do that too. And in grief, it's the time when you get to say no and set those boundaries and start learning to say me first. And it's not selfish, it's self-care.
Amen.
Yeah.
That is a great place to sort of wrap up here. I would love to just touch just on again what the remedies are for this busyness. You know, one thing in addition to taking that little bit of time in the morning or in the evening or whenever it might be and to setting boundaries is just really, you know, also learning to listen to our bodies and, you know, if something is going to take more from us than it's going to give us, you know, that's become a little bit of a litmus test for me in general, where I feel like, yes, you know, these are the good reasons to do something or not do something. But if I sort of look at the net gain or loss, like in your example, yes, I want to support my mom, but I also know that I'll be exhausted and maybe it takes too many resources in those things. And, you know, really being able to look big picture and say what's going to feed me and what's going to take too much of a toll on me.
Great.
So self-care, I love it. So often that's, you know, what we come back to. So I
Agree.
want to thank you so much for being here. We have a couple other folks who are joining us, and I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but certainly want to take a moment to just open up the conversation. If there are any questions or comments that anyone wants to make, this would be a great time and no pressure at all, because this is a really meant to be a comfortable, safe place to connect. So let's give it a second. See if anybody wants to chat. So I guess we'll go ahead and just conclude. We will be doing our third session on physical barriers to grief, which is no doubt going to be another interesting one.
Mm.
Um, we will be sharing the link to this event in this video. Most of these videos will be housed on YouTube at the moment. So we'll go ahead and share those so that you can catch up this on your own time, or you could share it with someone who you think might benefit just from checking out this short chat that we've had. And if you'd like to contact Carol or myself, Carol does active grief coaching, one-to-one coaching. And personally, I spend a little bit less time in the one-on-one space, but have also created a community called Scars to Medals, which is a virtual healing community. And you can find out about the work that both of us are doing at our websites, which is an easy thing to do because my website is lisamcfarland.com and Carol's website is carolbanens.com. So we're easy to find. We look forward to hearing from you. And before we wrap up, Carol, any last thoughts about these boundaries?
Oh, no, I think we've probably said it all. I think we ended on a good note. Just reach out for support. I think that's the main thing. You really don't have to do it alone, even if your family or society, culture around you is not supportive. There are support networks for you. So reach out.
Excellent. Thank you, Carol, for being with me this
Thank you.
morning. Thank you for those of you who have joined us. And until we meet again, let's do our best to stay present, to stay grateful, and to stay healing. And have a really good day today.
Thank you.
Thank you.